Yes, team. Welcome to another episode of the Total Mental Performance Podcast. This podcast come around in a really nice way. I've met today's guest at our mutual friend, mentor, client, Neil Shoney. Uh, in the previous episode, you'd have listened to Joe, and at the end of that conversation, I said, Joe, who should I get on the podcast? I want blokes that are really good at what they do, and they're really nice and good human beings. And he went, Ben, you've met Ben. I went, So today's guest is Ben Knight. Ben is the founder of the Trade Tribe, and he's the head trader. And he works very much in that space. He helps business owners trade in less than 5 minutes a day to increase their capital and build wealth. So, Ben, mate, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So, open question, like, what do you do?
So, you hit it perfectly there. So, I help busy people learn to invest in the stock market in less than 5 minutes a day. So, a huge thing for me, as I think most business owners, is the time restriction. And while I used to do a bit more in-depth trading stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit, it's not really that sustainable for the normal person who's got a life already. Yeah, you probably don't want to be cracking a full-time job. So I've definitely moved into like the investing side of things, which is a lot lower time commitment, where anybody can do that. Anyone can dedicate a few minutes to make a difference.
Mm. And how did you get into that? Like, how did you stumble into the world of trading? Because often I've worked with professional bankers. I've worked with DIY traders that have figured it out themselves. Those tend to be the two paths, unless you come from a sort of financial institution background. Other people stumble onto it. Usually they're annoyed or pissed off at something else. Uh, how did you get into that world?
I'm definitely the latter group there. Well, for me, to be fair, the actual goal was never to get into trading and investing. It was actually to get into business. So from a really young age, and I can't tell you the reason for this, I knew that I didn't want a 9 to 5 career. Like I was so adamant that I didn't want that. And if I really look back, it's probably as a kid, my parents were always working a lot, which I know most people's parents are. My mum and dad away all the time working. Spent a lot of time with my grandparents because of that. And I always saw them working so much, but we didn't necessarily have more than other people. So for me, I was always like, hang on a minute, there's something here, right? They're working as hard as they could, but we don't have more money. So from a young age, I really saw the imbalance between work and money. It's not the same thing. So I really was always looking for, okay, I'm going to be a business owner because my grandfather was a business owner and I saw what a different lifestyle that was. And I really liked that sort of having that control, that responsibility. So I thought, okay, this is for me. And really from a young age, maybe probably definitely younger than 10, I was always set out like, what do I need to do to become a business owner? So that meant even on the education side, always picking like the business subjects, going to university to do international business, all that kind of thing, which, in hindsight was a bit stupid because we all know that doesn't equal business knowledge at all. So yeah, it really just went down that path actually. And what happened for me was I did all of that, come out of university with my international business degree, and thought, right, let's get into business. And realised I didn't have a clue about how to actually start,
Mm.
which is a great job from our education system.
Well, funny you mentioned that, right? Because when I was 16, I had a decision to make, which was go and do your A levels and go and study business, uh, or start a business, or and right as I decided, right, I don't think the A levels thing is for me. There was a guy called Peter Jones, and Peter Jones, he was on Dragon's Den. He had a school called the Enterprise Academy. So there, you would learn how to come up with a business idea, how to do the market research, how to test the idea, pitch for investment, and then run a small little business, right? So I was like, I'd even been looking at universities, and I was like, maybe it's Portsmouth because I'm not going to. I'm not an academic guy, right? So I'm not going to get into the big ones. I like Portsmouth. Maybe I'll go down there. Maybe I'll do this. I'll do that. I had that dilemma, but my line of thinking was bloody hell. That's a lot of debt to put me into, and I'm not sure I'm going to get the skills that I need to actually set up a company. And luckily, that's when the Peter Jones came in, and he taught us all about entrepreneurial minds and entrepreneurial thinking. But I was in the same boat, and I was that close to going right. University is, but I didn't.
Interesting. And would you say that sort of set you on the path you're on today with the business that you run? And because I'm
Yeah, I
guessing
mean, all my clients, I'd say 80% of my clients are business owners. The other 20% are execs, right? So I'm fascinated by the entrepreneurial mind. I'm fascinated by ambition. So that was all about the entrepreneurial mind. It was all about ambition, and that's the bit that keeps me interested. So sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but I really resonate with that bit because the education system definitely doesn't set you up for this stuff. That's for sure.
Absolutely not. And the one thing I will thank it for, and I am super grateful for it, was my degree was international business, which by default meant I had to live abroad.
Oh,
And
cool. Where did you go?
so I did a year in Florida, half a year in Spain, and half a year in Canada.
Result.
And yeah, I know. You can see why I picked that degree, right? But before I went, if you'd have asked me, "Are you really like an open-minded person?" and everything, I'd have said, "Yeah, I like to try all these things. I'm good at talking to people, great communication. I love others." There was so much I would have said. As soon as I started to spend any time abroad, actually not like a holiday, but actually immersing yourself, you realise how little you actually know,
Mm.
how sort of sheltered we are here in the UK education system. So that was a huge learning point for me, and
Yeah.
I learned more from just being around other people, other cultures, other ways of life than I ever did in the classroom,
You
which I
don't
think
know
was
you don't know your own country until you leave it, right? And
great.
it's only when you leave it you see the
Mhm.
bits that you actually really love, and then you start to see bits. Hang on, why do we do that? Like one thing I can't wrap my head around when I go home on a Friday night, I walk through a town centre, like everyone's wankered. Everyone is like I can't wrap my head around why is so because where I live, there's no like people drink, there's pubs and bars and clubs and whatever, but no one gets drunk in the street. And I'm like, but that's such a normal thing for us. It's almost like it's a Friday night. Why is everyone not wanking in the street, right? So it's only when you leave do those cultural differences really become really obvious.
So true, so true. And I think, again, I'm sure we'll get into this in a bit about around the mindset. That was the biggest shift I can ever look back on and say, maybe top two, the biggest mindset shifts I've ever had. Being around people who thought differently, had different
Mm.
expectations of themselves, expectations of the world, totally changed my reality, if I can say that, which was amazing.
Americans are different, aren't they? They're so entrepreneurial. Like if you fail in America, they're like, "Don't worry, buddy, you go back and win." Whereas in England, we're like, "Ah, I told you." It's like it's a completely different set. So I can imagine how a year as a
Yeah,
young man in that environment would have completely changed a lot for you.
absolutely. Their drive, entrepreneurial, like you said, but equally just their motivation for life. Like you're walking around, everyone's like, "I have a great day," that kind of thing. It's so little, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because if everyone's in that mindset, and then you come here and you get people groaning at you, and you're lucky if you get a smile at the checkout, that kind of stuff, it does have a knock-on effect too to how you actually get through life, how you walk through life. So I loved it honestly, and like, I call US my second home now because I love that mindset, and
Yeah.
they always want more. They're always going for it, and yeah, it was a huge
Yeah.
impact for
I
sure.
can imagine. Okay, so you graduate university, then what happens?
So as I said, realised I didn't actually know anything. So it was probably my first time of delving into external education, I'll call it, like getting courses, coaching, that kind of stuff. I didn't really know what I was doing. And one thing I'd heard was about things like, I don't know if you know Amazon FBA, which is
Uh-huh. Yeah.
essentially, yeah, like selling on Amazon, essentially, for anyone listening who's not sure. And I thought, right, great, Amazon's a big company. I need help. Like, let's sort of do a partner, if you will, like that sense. Let's leverage their brand. So, started trying to do that. Following courses and whatnot, and quite quickly learned that I had no idea what I was doing, and it was a lot harder to do than I had imagined. Which, again, I don't think school really teaches you. It doesn't prepare you for how challenging real things are or real success is. You can study for a week for a test, get an A, and be like, oh, I worked really hard on that. Reality in real life isn't like that at all, right? Whether it's business, fitness, whatever it may be. So I think that was a good wake up call for sure. That I need to put a lot of work into this. So that didn't last long. Then again, this is all out of the fear of getting a 9 to 5 job, right? So it was just getting away energy. Like I don't want that. And the next thing I went for was I tried to learn to code mobile phone apps. Now, I am the least techie person that you know. So it was a ridiculous choice. But that thought shows how desperate I was to not get sucked into employment and risk getting comfortable there. And when that inevitably failed, I sort of thought, right, what about this trading thing? Like, I know that's I'm not that interested, but it's something I know I can do on the side to make money while I figure out what I really want to do. That was my mindset, which was not true either, by the way. But once I got into it, I was like, okay, cool. I actually quite like this, and it really led me into. Well, I did a lot of like what you'd call trial and error.
Uh-huh.
So very naive, as I think most people are. That you don't know what you don't know, right? We don't learn financial education at school, so I was diving in, losing a lot of money, trying a lot of things, but it was quite enjoyable to do that.
And did you start with like a practice account? Did you start with your money? Did you raise some money? Like how that first, because there's a moment, right, where you make your first trade and your first 10, your first 100. So how did you start?
So I started, I believe, not even realizing a demo account was a real thing, like a practice thing. So I started with real money, and I was of the mindset, which I look back now and think is silly, but I hear it a lot too. It's like, oh, unless it's real, I won't take it seriously.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people say that, particularly guys, I will say as well. Like, it's like I would start with a practice, but I'm just going to put some money in and try it out. It's a really, really bad way to approach things because one, just knowing how to click a few buttons and buying something doesn't actually mean you're practicing that thing.
Mm.
So I think this is a big misconception about investing in general, which hopefully will be useful to some people. A lot of people think you can just try it out, like dip your toe in and see how it goes. But what it means for those people is they'll probably set up an account, like a broker, which we'll talk about. They'll put some money in and then buy something. And then when it doesn't go well, they'll be like, oh, well, this doesn't work. But you
Mm.
might practice the thing.
Yeah.
You've
You've
just
not learned the skill.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Because it's not the same as like sports, which I think we do relate to. Because like sports, if you've never kicked a football before and you buy a football, go in the garden and start kicking it, you're going to get better. Investing doesn't work like that. You're not just going to naturally get better at it. You need a bit of a direction to go in.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of people fall down. And then when they fall at the first hurdle, they're like, oh, it's not for me. It's too risky.
Yeah. Same with any skill development, right? And it's like, oh, I didn't win straight away, so I guess that's it, or it's not for me, Yeah, maybe, or maybe you just need to keep tinkering away. So, all right, so you're in, and you're making your first few trades, and you put some money in, and you've won some, you probably lost some as well. Then what happens?
So I was losing a lot, I would say. And I mean a lot as in often rather than a lot of money. I didn't have that much to actually invest. So let's say I was using a
So
few
when you say
hundred
losing a lot, you mean let's say
consistently.
you place 10 trades, eight of
Yeah.
them would lose. Is that a lot, or is
Well,
that not a lot?
that would have been really nice.
Well,
Yeah, easily, yeah, 9 out of 10, let's say. Like it was bad. And I realised then, and this is a lesson that I've carried forward into all areas of my life, I was losing so much that it was actually costing me more to not know what I was doing than it would have cost me to learn what I was doing. And it's a phrase I now use. It's either way you pay. And what it means is in life, there's always a cost to every action and inaction. We're just always choosing which price we prefer to pay. So in that instance, I could either invest in my education and like get a mentor and learn to do it properly, which was cost, or pay the hefty price to keep losing and making mistakes. And again, that sort of mindset has taken me it's served me really well in this because from school you don't get that, right? You're like, oh, if it costs money, it's probably a bad thing, and I'll just learn. But in reality, it's actually not true because you're choosing the other cost then, right? Of just wasting time, wasting money.
I think also one thing that I've learned, particularly when I've seen people that haven't got any business background that then go into business or investing, is this expectation that everything will definitely work, and everybody's looking for a guarantee. Like
Mhm.
this is definitely going to make me money. This is definitely going to work, and it just doesn't work like that. And the most disappointment comes from really poor expectations. So like, right, I'm going to invest in this stock or this trade or this digital marketing campaign or this mentor or this, and it's like, and it's definitely going to work. And if it doesn't, they're a bad person or they're a scam or they're this or that. When the reality is there is no guarantees, and what works for some people doesn't work for everyone, and you got to accept that sometimes you'll take a little bet or you'll make a little punt and you try and learn it and it just don't work, and that's okay. And it's in the disappointment is where the pearls of wisdom come in, right? And it's often that fear of what if I lose. It's like, well, if you accept that you probably will, but if it does actually work out and you can afford the loss, then fucking hell, what a win that is. But I find that often is the thing that stops people from really taking those bets to start.
Totally agree with you there. And I think, well, based on your audience being execs and business owners, nobody got to where they are instantly or overnight. Like nobody did, right? And we know that because we've all been doing it a while. But at the start of the journey, you don't want to believe that either. You want to believe that you can get rich overnight. I saw this guy on Instagram do it once, like he bought some crypto thing and it went to the moon. Unfortunately, that's not the reality for, well, for most people. And it's a bad expectation to have because, like you said, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and that's going to be discouraging. Whereas the only guarantee that you can ever have is that you don't give up. Because if your effort is the only guarantee, then eventually you're going to win,
Yeah, that's it.
which I love. Gives you a lot
So
of
you,
power.
so you trade it away, right? Then what happens?
Yeah, good question. So I really loved it, I will say, and I got a little bit obsessed with it. And I probably for the next, if I'm being realistic time wise, it was probably a good 2 years. Every single day, hours a day, learning this, practicing it, doing it, implementing it. And the reason I'm saying that and highlighting those time frames is because I became what you would call like a full time day trader. Okay, the classic guy sitting in front of the screen watching lines go up and down for hours,
I
that
see
kind of
them
thing.
here all the time.
I bet.
I think I told you when we were speaking last week
Yeah.
that I sat down. I still haven't been back to that coffee shop. I'll take a picture. I sat down, right? And there's like six blokes with a laptop with two additional screens, and there's just charts across them, and they're just sipping on a shisha pipe, pressing buttons all day long. But it kind of looks like that. It almost looks like the guys that are pulling the slot machines. It looks similar, right? It's the same. It's the same mechanic, and
Yeah.
it's the same thing, which is you. Well, I guess not because there's an analytical bet, whereas a slot machine really is just. But the mechanics are the same thing, right?
Absolutely, 100% that. And as I said, the reason I'm highlighting like it took me 2 years to get what I would call consistent, not even amazing, just consistent, is because a lot of people think, particularly with trading, it's the way it's sold online. You can do a 1 day, 3 day course or whatever, and then suddenly be a trader, and that's going to make you're going to be successful with that. It's so unrealistic. It's unbelievable because what people don't realize that trading, like trading, which is like fast paced, in and out kind of thing, that takes years to get good at because it's an advanced skill. An analogy I use is like kicking a football for the first time and then expecting to play in the Premier League the next weekend. Like it's ridiculous. The worlds apart in terms of ability, but that's actually what day trading is. It's a full time career. You can't expect to be good at it overnight. Kind of like any career that anybody does that's listening. You on day one in your career to now, worlds apart, right? Like you've come along so well. That's the level you'd need to be consistent with trading, which for most people we don't want to put that sort of time in, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So so then you're 2 years in. You're now one of those guys behind the laptops, like fully in locked in matrix mode, right?
Yeah,
Then
that's
what
it.
happens?
So I took that as an opportunity to travel a lot around the world with my laptop because it's quite the one good thing about trading I would say it's quite mobile. Yeah, so I was going back to America a lot of time around Europe, that kind of thing, and I loved it in terms of the traveling. The hours I spent in front of the computer, I absolutely hated it. I can't stress how non-glamorous the trading lifestyle actually is. In reality, it's not like the movies. Everyone's seen Wolf of Wall Street, thinks, it's a lot of fun. It's not like that at all. It's quite a lonely career, if I'm being honest, because for however many hours a day you've set up for, it's you looking at your screen and however you're feeling on that day, as in like something might have happened in the morning or last night before you went to bed, that will have a knock-on impact to how much money you win or lose that day. Like that's very high stress. If you're having a bad day and because of that it's having a knock-on impact to your what you're doing and your money's going down and down, that compounds, all right? And it is quite a spiral. And I think a lot of people in that career will turn to things like alcohol and drugs and
Mm.
whatever just to numb that a little bit, which is quite a scary thought, really. If you're having to, let's call it self medicate just to get through your job, it's probably not the best job for you mentally.
Mm. Yeah, without a doubt. And in that sense, traders are a little bit like pilots. I don't know if you know much about pilots, but they're trained to ignore their emotions because if
Hmm.
you're flying a plane with hundreds of passengers, right, at a high stakes job, you don't want an emotional pilot. You're taught to just ignore, and
Yeah.
with traders and bankers, and you see it a lot in salespeople actually too, because it's so up and down and emotional. That self medication of dealing with that stress,
Hmm.
it doesn't help you to be emotional, right? And I read Rich Dad Poor Dad by Guy Kawasaki, and then The Cash Flow Quadrant, and those two books changed my whole life on finances, on all of that. And what was so interesting about the cash flow quadrant was he in that book he basically explains how you can generate passive income, how it's important, but 90% of the book is all about mindset and emotions and thinking. And he literally says this. He said 90% of investing is emotion management and feelings management, and 10% of it is the financial instrument. And I found that so interesting given my role, right? What do? I'm a mental performance consultant. So I help people think, feel, and perform on different levels. I'm diving into all sorts of emotions around fear, doubt, imposter syndrome, clarity, vision, getting focused. But a lot of it's about the emotional components. And when I start looking into investing and trading and all the emotions that go on within that, fear and greed, fear of loss. What if this all comes crashing down? Greed. Oh, I got to maximize everything I can. I can make loads of money now. They're just, it fascinates me. So hearing you talk about, the day in and the day out, the emotional life of a trader, going in, getting your ass kicked, and then coming back the next day trying to win again. It's almost like a football striker to a degree, isn't it? Confidence game.
Mm. 100. Yeah, that's a great analogy, and that does take a toll on you mentally, because you're right. You can compartmentalize and not have the emotions during the thing, but outside of that, there needs to be a release somewhere. Like it's like a pressure cooker. You can't just build up all that pressure and not let it out. Right, something's going to go. So for me personally, and don't mind sharing this, like I was quite a heavy drinker actually, and at the time, I probably wouldn't have said it was a problem. And it's just like I had a lot of fun in the evenings, worked really hard worked hard in the day, or stressed in the day, maybe you could say that. But then had a good time in the evening and then sort of recycled it. And I'm not like saying I was an alcoholic or anything like that necessarily. And people that really struggle with that kind of thing. But it definitely wasn't serving me. Like that was a terrible loop to be in. Like, to have a really stressful day and then maybe a release at the evening. It was probably really one side to the other, kind of like a pendulum, right? You're never sitting in the middle balanced, or whatever balance means. So it wasn't sustainable anyway. And as I said, the other thing about it for me was lonely, because I like people. I think my best experiences in the world have always been when I've shared things with others. You got to help other people, whatever it may be. Doing things alone is not, don't think, what we're built for necessarily. So I was like, right, I need to get out of this just to get my sanity back and my headspace back. Because if it takes up your entire time, you don't have a life on the side of that. And you might say, oh, but the money's good. Good for what though? What's the trade off there? Good for your life? Like that's the trade off. I don't think that's a good, ironically, a good trade in the end. So what it led me to was, and this is like a few years in. I can't say this was like an overnight realization. And no, I was probably in that world for like 4 or 5 years, and I thought, well, I need to get out of this. So I started developing a way or a strategy, if you will, where I could start investing rather than trading. Now, for those of you listening who are not sure the difference, it's just time frame. So trading would be when you're buying and holding it for seconds, minutes, hours, days, potentially a few weeks. Whereas investing would be more weeks to months to years kind of thing. And the beauty of it is the more time you are planning to hold something, the less time you have to spend doing anything with it, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but if you're going to be in something for like a few seconds, it's going to take you a few hours to get like that perfect moment where you line it all up perfectly and do that. Whereas if you're going to buy something and hold it for the next year, you probably don't need to be doing too much day to day in that year, right? So I really liked that appeal, and I was thinking, all right, well, I could do that, make some income from it, but also get my life back, which was more valuable. So I made the strategy, which coincidentally I now teach today, but I only did it just to get my life back originally. That's why I developed this thing where I invest in 5 minutes a day. And yeah, it was a weird, fortuitous line of events how it sort of led to here.
Okay, so you've come out of full time trading, you figured out something that works for you, and you've gone, hang on, this might work for other people too.
Mm.
So now, how much of your time is split teaching versus trading? Is it? No, I practice what I preach. I spend 5 minutes a day doing my investing, and then the rest of it, the trade tribe. Well, what does that look like now?
Great question. So when I say 5 minutes, I think people think, oh, it must be more than that. But quite literally, I spend 5 minutes or even less daily on it because, again, like I'm on average in my investments for like months at a time, a few months. So if you buy something and you're in it for a few months, you're probably doing, there's not too much to do tomorrow with that same investment, right? Kind of like growing things in the garden. You might need to water it every so often, but checking it every single day is probably not the best thing either. So really, it is a few minutes a day I spend on that, and then now I actually get the pleasure of teaching this as well, which I never thought was what I wanted to do until I started doing it. Because, and people say, and I totally understand this because there's a lot of rubbish out there, and I'm sure we'll get into like scams and whatnot in this talk. But people always say, "Oh, if you're so good at investing, why do you don't you just full time invest?" Well, I do, but it quite literally take 5 minutes. And I used to do that really,
Yeah.
and didn't enjoy that. But which is a good question. It's like, why don't you do it? So, one, I do, but it does quite literally take 5 minutes. So I'd have a lot of free time if I didn't do anything else. But the other side of it is, and I did not know this beforehand, doing something yourself and you get a win, you're like, oh, great, cool. It's quite fleeting. If you help somebody else do something and they get the result and it makes a difference for them, that's a hell of a lot more fulfilling. And I didn't appreciate that before. And maybe it's why people get into like teaching as a career, that kind of thing. You might think, oh, on the face of it, like, that doesn't make sense financially, but the the buzz you get from it, if you will, and the fulfillment of actually helping someone else and they get the result is mad. I didn't foresee it at all from me.
Well, you're teaching people how to fish, right? So when you teach people how to fish, in whichever pond it is that you're fishing in, and whatever type of fish, and we can go into. I love metaphors, right? Whichever rod, whether you're at sea, you're at a lake, whether it's sort of big sharks or whether it's like little lake fish, doesn't really matter what, right? But there is something thrilling about that. Like for me, what do I teach? I teach psychological freedom, not the absence of suffering, but the ability to suffer and still perform anyway. The ability to enjoy one's experience, the ability to actually curate an existence that feels so aligned, so fun, so clear. It just so happens because all of my clients own businesses. When I get them right, their businesses fly. I don't touch their businesses. I just help the individual, and there is something that like if I continued to sell software like I did in my previous career, I'd probably, if I'd kept going at the rate I am now, I'd probably be making a lot more personally
Mm-hmm.
just by doing that. I was fucking miserable, right? And who wants data analytics software? Boring. You know what I mean? Like it was so boring. It was data analytics and e-commerce. Whereas when I am sat with someone and I see, oh, they're never going to look at the world the same again after this conversation. That's like that transcends money. Like if
Mm-hmm.
money didn't exist, that feeling,
Yeah.
if we're gonna look at trades, that's such a great trade-off, right? It's like I'll definitely take that. So I hear you on the teaching. I had a similar moment in my career when I was selling software and I was teaching the juniors, and I was like, right, look, just here's how you need to manage your emotions, right? I know you want to go out on a Thursday and a Friday and a Wednesday, right? But that doesn't help you. Okay. Here are the questions you need to ask. You're getting fed up with cold calling or sending emails. Trust me, right? You just get used to it because until you're senior enough to have other people do that for you, you've got to earn your stripes and work your way through. And it was in that moment when I went, hang on a minute, I'm enjoying teaching and coaching and mentoring more than I
Mm-hmm.
am just signing the deal. It's something I think if you don't intend to be a teacher but you stumble onto it, it's like, oh, this is like immeasurable levels of treasure that I just cannot experience solely through scoring goals yourself. You know?
Exactly. So I've not really framed it like that before, but it's a really good way to put it. And I totally came into this accidentally because when I made that strategy to do it in 5 minutes a day for myself to get my life back, the first thing I did was get into property because my mindset was, well, I've done it in stocks. What's the next logical thing to invest in? Oh, property. Everyone, thinks that's a safe investment. So I got into property, and so not teaching anything at this stage. But then when you get into communities, which was what I was kind of thriving, like really wanted to have be part of, the one thing about property is there's really good communities within it. It's very much like everybody knows everybody kind of thing. But getting into that, and people are like to me, "Oh, you trade? Could you teach me this? Could you teach me how to do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Like, let me help you out." And then I started doing it, like you said, and I'm like, "Oh wow, this is a bit of an unknown treasure. I didn't really realize." So I started loving that, and then like you, I thought I actually enjoy this way more. It's way more fulfilling than me clicking a button and my wealth going up a little bit than helping somebody else do that and watching their face light up there, because everything changes as well. Everything's related. So yes, improving your money is obviously the goal that I'd like to help people with, but that's a knock-on effect, because when you got your money right, that means you can focus more on things like your health and spending time on the things that do really matter as well. But when you're stuck maybe in a more challenging financial situation, when you've got all that burden on you, you don't see that. You can't get out of that sort of like in the jar, if you will, where you can't see the outside because you're so got all this negativity around you. So I love that how sort of like knock on effect it is and how everything's related in that sense.
Yeah, well, the material freedom leads to internal freedom, and I think, I mean, where I live in Dubai, I live in a really quiet area. I don't live where all the Ferraris, Lamborghinis, glitzy stuff. People think that material freedom comes through things, particularly in this city, and you'll see it in every big city, right? But that's not where the freedom is. Material freedom, I think, gives you space to breathe, to not have to worry, to go, what do I actually want to do here? Whereas, like you, my parents were always working when I was growing up. So I was like, why are you working so hard? Why can't you come home and play with me? Like, what? What? And the same thing in the materials. Like, hang on, they're working that hard, and we have less materially versus if you're working that hard, surely, like, what? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners like feel that somewhere. But yeah, the material freedom does unlock internal freedom. But there's also a problem with that, and the problem that can come with is ah my most of my existence have been worrying about the material freedom. Now I don't feel materially trapped, but then there's psychology and emotions and overthinking, or oh my god, now I've got too much time, or how do I want to spend my time on the planet, or fucking hell, am I doing the right thing? And I see this with business owners when they get to a certain level, they've got more time, more freedom than ever. And they're like, I don't feel like lit up. And there's two camps. One is, well, now what? What do I do now? Because I've kind of ticked everything off, and I'm
Mhm.
kind of bored or stressed, or I'm creating problems that don't really need to exist. Then you've got the other end, which is there's a lot of emotions that haven't been dealt with. So they're overwhelmed and they're anxious. And then guess what? They self sabotage and it creates problems. And then they have a material problem again, which they feel safe with. They like having a material problem. So they go and solve those. They feel good again. And then there's a material problem again. And then they're like, oh my God. And it goes round and round and round. So I think by unlocking one's material freedom, you certainly help them unlock a new level of internal freedom too.
I agree, and I think if you say to people, oh, "What do you really want in life?" Most people answer freedom of some sort, whether it's financial freedom, time freedom, whatever it may be. But what does that actually mean? Really, it's not the Lambos and the flying private jets and stuff. For most people, it's just less stress and more freedom and choice. Like that's really what most of us actually want if we delve deep. So yeah, the material thing. I always say a material wants, needs, and if it isn't a bad thing at all. I don't think that if is because for the right reasons. So I ran a workshop actually last weekend where somebody was questioning me about material stuff because I'm not the trader go post loads of photos of cars and whatnot and my watches and all that stuff. I don't do it because that's not really that. Well, it's not really aligned with what I think, because I think if I see that stuff, I'm like, what a load of shit that is. That person doesn't own that car. Like it just screams scam. So I'm quite the anti-trading guru, if you will. Let's say, but in real terms, and I heard this not too long ago. Like getting things is fun, having things isn't. It's actually
Yeah,
like
true.
and actually getting it. That's actually the enjoyment bit. And then a lot of the time, you'll buy something and after a few weeks, you're like, kind of become accustomed to it. And a really good litmus test as to whether you truly wanted something or it was for the wrong reasons is if that excitement stays with you. So the few times in my life that I bought something that you might consider material, but I knew I really wanted it, like, and it had been a long time. It wasn't like a snap decision. I really wanted it. Those things, the excitement doesn't die down.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a couple of those material things I think about now,
Mm,
where as soon as I see it or I touch it, I'm
yeah,
like, I still love this, and I've had this
yeah, yeah,
years.
yeah.
Yeah, like, I still love this thing, and that joy hasn't dissipated. Yeah.
Exactly that. So that was something you truly wanted. Whereas probably, well, definitely in my case, I don't mind speaking for that. If I bought something, there's a good chance maybe I just bought it to impress others, or it was just something I thought I wanted, but reality I didn't really care that much. So if you can find those material things that are going to set you alight and you are going to be proud of them, and then that's a great thing to go for, I think.
Mm. Another question that because when I'm working with clients, right, and they're going through serious personal change, they start questioning everything. And sometimes there's a moment where they're like, "Am I doing the right thing, wrong thing? Am I doing it out of fear or judgment or insecurity?" I have one client. I'm going to give a very material level a material level purchase that sounds very superficial, but actually when I dug into it, it wasn't. So I had a client. We're doing a lot of work around insecurity. We're doing a lot of work around just self worth, and he'd got to the point where he was ready to buy a Ferrari. So he comes into the session and he goes, "Right, I want to buy the Ferrari, but I don't know if I'm like just doing it for other people or if like it's the right thing or the wrong thing or I don't know. I just don't know. What do you think?" And I said, "Tell me about the car." And the guy went on a 10-minute speech, like on, well, the chassis is actually different this year. The brake, they're testing a new carbon fiber in the brake pads, so it actually might be a bad. But and then he told me the history of the line and how they differed year to year and why he particularly loved this one and why he wanted that one and he was just and he's quite a reserved character. He's not very rarely did I see this client really light up. He was like, he's almost coming out of his chair. This is, it's just, it's, and he goes, does that give you kind of like an insight on the car itself? And I said, well, I let you run on. How long do you think that was? He's like, a couple of minutes. I went, 10 minutes. And he looks at the clock. He goes, 10 minutes? I was like, yeah, 10 minutes. Uh, I think you love this thing. You truly love this thing. And I don't think, I don't think it's an issue. And back then, I used to write up all the. Now I get clients to write up their notes of the session and send it back to me. But back then, I used to do it the other way around.
Mm,
I do that because it helps them process their learnings even more versus me being sort of more directive. But at that time, I said, I've got one final question, right? If every time you drove the Ferrari, it was invisible and no one else could see it, would you still want it? And he went, absolutely every day of the week and twice on Sundays. I went, so subject line, right? One of the coolest emails ever sent. Buy the Ferrari. And he went and got it and he loved it and adores it, and I think that's the difference between like, do you actually want it or do you doing it for other people? And when you can make that shift, or I'm doing it for me, not for others,
mm.
and you just save yourself a lot of time, energy, and hassle. But that can happen with the material world.
Yeah, and I think as business owners, particularly, you're quite exposed to that in a sense of your income can dramatically change in quite a short space of time. You can have great months, you can have bad months, whatever it may be. And the temptation may be in the, let's say, the better months when your income does increase and you want to reward yourself. You can quite literally go and spend money on things that you couldn't previously. So the material thing might be there. And again, as long as you're using it for the right thing, that's not a bad thing at all. But you've got to be really mindful of that. Right.
Mm,
Whereas if you're in a career where you've got like a set income, you probably don't get that shock, at the end of the month. Like, oh my god, I've got so much more money than I know what to do with. So as business owners, I think they've got to be really mindful of that because if you start just wasting the money on things, then it is a waste essentially.
yeah.
But
And people can freak out because they can go, "Oh my god, I've got all this cash, I need to spend it." And then the other way, you can go, "I've got all this cash, I've got to hoard it." And I think it just comes down to like anything. It's acclimatization, and acclimatizing to a new level here. And it's the same with your trades, right? Because at the end of the day, Guy Ritchie said something beautiful on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think Joe Rogan asked him like, "What's the difference between doing like a $6 million film and a $60 million film?" And Guy Ritchie goes, it don't really matter. I learned after the first couple that it's just the same. It's all a bunch of zeros. It's just an extra one at the end.
yeah,
And I'm curious with you, right?
Mhm.
specifically around trading,
Yeah.
is there a central nervous system thing? Because I've never done trading or investing or whatever. Made a mistake on Bitcoin, managed to get all my money back out and broke even. And I was like, right, managed to pull that off, right. But other than that, I've never actually played in that area. But
Mhm.
the, are there some people that you see
Mhm.
where the extra zero don't matter, and in other people it completely cripples them? Like, how do you square that circle in your experience?
Great question. So I actually deal with this with every single client, and it's kind of like one of my first bits of advice. So how I sort of operate, because just for everyone listening, I only invest in stocks, right? US stock market, individual companies, because I like business. Like, it makes sense to me. I know what I'm investing in. I know what they do. Like, what profit they're making, what debt they're, that kind of thing. Whereas things like other things like crypto, which I don't understand as much, it's harder to find that information. So I quite like that about stocks. But the thing is, when I start people off, I do start them on the practice account because you should learn when there's no risk at stake. And then when they move into real money, I always tell people start with less than you're planning to. Okay, you always start with less than you're planning to. So if you'd earmarked, round numbers here, if someone says to me, I want to invest £2,000, cool, let's start with 500 then. Let's get used to having money on the table. Let's get used to it. And just make sure that you don't freak out, essentially, because the first trade is the scariest, right? So as long as you don't freak out and you can do that, cool. And then once you've done that, you've got your profit back, then maybe we up it for the next one. And you slowly do that gradual increase. Now, the problem is where I'm doing something which I consider quite simple in the world of investing, people get good quite quickly because it's not like that advanced, which I love, by the way. I like simplicity in everything I do now. What happens is people do the first few investments, see they've done it well, and they think, all right, I'm going to take this seriously. I want to put a lot more money in. And I won't let people do a big jump because if you start investing with £1,000 and then suddenly you throw in £50,000, you're not ready for, like, you don't, I don't know the words to illustrate this with a metaphor as such, but that stretches too much for you at this stage because just having money doesn't mean you know how to use it. I call it like the lottery winner syndrome. Where there's a crazy stat like 95% of lottery winners lose it within the first 3 years or something like that. The reason is just having money doesn't mean you know how to use it. So same with investing. Knowing how to invest £1,000 and then suddenly jumping in with like £50,000, that's you don't know how to invest that much yet. You're not used to it, and it's going to suddenly become emotional. You're going to forget everything you've ever done. And I did that with my first investments. I started demo account, moved on to the real account with like we're talking like £500, nothing life changing. But even that was so emotional because I just wasn't prepared for it. I didn't know what I was doing. So that instead, if you can gradually grow it, and I say to people like incrementally, like go from 1,000 to 2,000, then to maybe four, then five, then 10. Making that means that you're actually not going to feel any different when you get to investing 50,000 to when you started with a 500 because you've made that growth. Again, kind of like anyone listening in your career, if you looked at yourself from day one and you saw where you're at now, you're like, oh my god, like, how am I ever going to get up to that? That's insane how good that person is. But on the journey, you probably didn't realize it every day. Like, you don't sit there every day, like, oh my god, I'm so much better than I was before. You don't do that. Same thing with investing.
Okay, I like to use I like this metaphor might help. You might say no, it doesn't, but sometimes I get clients that come to me where their business has grown faster than they have. So uh, maybe they've started a business like yours. Maybe they've started a coaching company or they've started a technology business or whatever. And essentially, the company's grown and evolved faster than they're ready for, and they don't know what to do and they're freaking out. So I call it altitude sickness. Have you ever gone somewhere? Much higher than what you're acclimatized to?
Yeah.
I went to Peru, did three ayahuasca ceremonies in a week, right? And when I first got there, I was like, that's all right, I've been up a few mountains. I got there and I'm like, I've got headaches and I've got stomach cramps and I feel sick. And I'm like, oh my God. And I just couldn't handle it. And for 2 days, I was just a write off, walking around, I was out of breath, right? But eventually I calmed down and eventually I was all right. And then eventually I did the ceremony or whatever. But the altitude sickness was so clear. And I think in any field, you see this with Premier League football players, they come from playing in France and then they come to the Premier League and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is very different, right? Some players, some people have just got that set of lungs that can acclimatize that quickly. Some people don't. And I guess it's the same thing here with the trading, which is, you know, going from I can walk around at 100 feet above sea level, fine. And then you go, oh fuck it, let's go up to 1,000. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, what's going on? I think it was Warren Buffett that said it, which was they're bad investments if they keep you up at night. And I think that plays into the acclimatization period, right? If you've not acclimatized to the level of risk or what's going on, then you probably are going to be quite emotional with what's going on. Am I understanding that correct as to what you're communicating?
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny that analogy. I've not actually heard Warren Buffett say it like that, but it's very, very similar to what I say when people ask me, how much should I start investing with? Or what's a good amount to start with? Like, there is no actual good, bad amount, but a good amount has to be, I've kind of got two parameters, if you will. It's got to be enough to keep you interested. Meaning, if you start with an amount of money that you couldn't care less about, there's no way you're going to take it seriously and be dedicated to following this. Like if you start with £10, that's not going to get you up every
Yeah,
day. It's not. So enough to keep you interested, but not so much that it keeps you up at night. Right? If there's an amount of money that causes you internal stress and turmoil, you're losing sleep, that's far too much. So whatever that number would be between those for each person, that's a good amount to start with, and then grow from there. You
yeah,
shouldn't just take like a one size fits all approach to it.
yeah. So I want to talk about fear and greed.
Mm,
You know, greed, one of the ultimate sins, one of the original sins, gluttony. Um, how do you personally manage fear and greed?
Great question. So two different approaches here for each. So the first for fear, well, I'll start with greed actually. For greed, it's really simple for me in that it's all about having boundaries and like set system in place. And what I mean by that is, and it comes in a lot with profits. So if you're in any investment, whether you're great at investing or you're new to it, there's going to be a bit of like, oh, I really want a bit more out of this, or oh my god, I hope it's not going to drop, and there's a bit of fear and like whatever. So to remove all of that, you have to remove the human element to it. So with all of my investing, it's so systemized that it's like when this happens, I do this. When this happens, I do this, and like it's not
Mm,
because it just removes me. And then if it goes well, I'm like, great, system works. If it goes badly, I'm like, well, I didn't make a mistake. I just followed the system.
yeah,
It just
yeah,
detaches you from it.
yeah.
And
Nice.
God, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
So anyone new to investing, just have like those set parameters. Like when this happens, I will do this. Even if it's as simple as look, when I get to X amount of profit, I'm selling, and you stick to it. Oh, you feel good about it, and also it teaches you a good lesson as well around discipline. Which
yeah,
as an executive, everybody knows that discipline in yourself is probably the biggest differentiator between everyone. So it's a very good habit to get into of setting those.
So the set point for greed for you is I have a pre-agreed limit upon which, when it hits this number, the percentage whatever return I sell. Is that right?
Yeah, in essence,
As
and
simple as that.
make it as
Or
technical or whatever it is you like. But yeah, as long as when this happens, I do this. This is how I act.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. It's funny because the real estate market where I am right now is the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing markets in the world. There are people becoming air quotes like millionaires overnight.
Yeah,
Um, but greed, right? Greed is, and I'm in a city that is full of greed, and I can feel it. I look outside right now, and I'm in a quiet area that's all done. But I can see six towers in the horizon, like all going up at least just out my window, right? So it's phenomenal. And I was speaking to a friend the other day, and essentially what he was telling me was he bought an off-plan property 18 months ago, and then in 6 months, the value of that property is going to be 60% higher. No, now right now it's 60% higher, and then in 6 months when it finishes, he thinks it's going to be 80% higher. So I'm like, where else in 2 years do you get a 60% return? Why don't you just sell it? And he's like, yeah, but I want it to complete, and then I think I'm going to rent it out, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? So I'm like, before I used to be very high risk in various different investments of business, life, whatever. I go, fuck it, we'll figure it out, fail fast, whatever. But then I learned there's two parts of capital, right? You've got offense and defense. Can you make money? Can you keep it? So my offense was really good, defense not so good. So that's what I've been learning on my own journey of investing and how things work and whatever. But then I look at green, it's like I can see how quickly you can get caught up. Even in some investments I've made, I'm like, greed can make you rush. It's like, I've got to make that now. I've got to make the decision now because I'm going to miss out on this and this. And then the opposite, and fear can start to kick in. If I don't do it, so you're greedy and fearful, a dangerous combination of those two guys holding hands.
Mm.
And then you can really start to get in your own head. But I see, how do you handle greed? I can see you live by your philosophy of simplicity. I've already built the system, mate. I don't fuck with the system. If I get to this set point, out it goes. So, okay. What about fear then? Because
Mm.
managing greed is one thing, but managing fear, like really managing fear, even with your own pre-agreed set points, it's like football players. They're so invaluable, football players, right? Because Arteta's got his system, and we now live in a football world where it's all system-based players. You very rarely you get players just run on and do what they want. It's like, right, you run in here and you do this, and they treat them like robots. The problem with robots is these robots are emotional. So, it only takes one bad social media comment or one mistake, and next, their head's gone, and then fear sets in. And when you think about fear, right, it's in our limbic system. It's built to keep us alive. It doesn't care about your hopes, your dreams, your desires, logic. It's literally, if I think this thing's going to kill you, it will give you the nervous system response of a bear coming to attack you. So it doesn't care about your plan or your system. So a question I have for you is, I don't know, let's look at COVID and all the markets started to really drop, right?
Mhm.
How do you manage fear in those scenarios as an investor?
Excellent. So I'll answer it as an investor and as a business owner slash human, because as an investor, it's very much similar to greed in that if I've said I'm willing, let's say with the crash in COVID, if I've said that I'm willing to buy Google stocks
Uh,
at this price, and then overnight the world goes mad and it drops to this price, I should be delighted. If I was willing to buy like my favorite car at this price, and then suddenly overnight it was 50% off, oh, amazing! Like it'd be the happiest thing in the world. It's on sale. But if you didn't have a system and didn't know what you were investing in, then that's a lot more scary, right? People weirdly in investing, if something is dropped, they see it as a real negative. When in actual fact, as long as it's a good thing in the first place, it obviously doesn't apply to everything you could possibly invest in. But as long as it's a good company, which I think what you invest in is the most important thing, and that's what I focus on totally. As long as it's a good company, if it's at any sort of a drop, it's a discount. It's on sale, which is great. Which I think is very much like the longer term thinking kind of view, and it's probably so unsexy it's sexy in that sense.
yeah,
Because everyone's like, oh, I just want to make the quick wins and stuff. I don't want to be getting something when it's down. But the reality is that's where the fortunes are made. Like the
a
most
friend of
millions
mine,
are made.
yeah, a friend of mine the other day, he is a good investor. He invests across lots of different asset classes,
Mm.
and he said, yeah, I like because I told him you were coming on. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I invest in a few stocks." And I was like, "Yeah, what's one you're particularly proud of?" And he goes, "Disney." I went, "What's that?" I goes, "I waited until they announced that Disneyland was shutting at COVID." I went, "Yeah." So what happened? He went, "Really simple. The stock price plummeted. So guess what? I bought a load of stock, and then 2.5 years later." He put in 10K. Now he's got 16. And Guy Kawasaki talks about again, it's all emotion management. And he's like, when markets crash and everything's low, that's when you buy. It's really simple, right? But human nature comes in and we'll become fearful and everything's coming crashing down. And it's like, oh, it's the end of the world. What's going on? And as somebody that lives in the world of emotion and understanding emotion, right? I geek out on it. I really, just like you probably geek out on various different trades and instruments and what you can do. I geek out on the emotional part.
Mm.
So uh, I see what you mean by, yeah, everything's just, if you have the mindset of it's a good company, good leadership, and everything's on sale, then
Mm.
yeah, I can see that. How do you, now that's the investor part of you. What about the human bit? Does the human bit ever hijack you?
Occasionally, it does, but it's always served me well. So how I handle fear as a human slash business owner is I kind of like to take a step out, bird's eye view, if you will, and be like, how bad is this really? Like, what is the actual risk here? And you have to be careful when you're saying this to people who are just getting into investing because you don't want to give the wrong message. But if I said to somebody, who's never invested before, doesn't want to get in, you say, oh, why don't you invest? It's like if one of two things typically they say either just don't know how or it's risky. Right? Knowledge, I totally get that. we don't learn this. That's another conversation. But the risk side, someone's like, it's too risky. I'm like, okay, cool. So what does risk actually mean? And the obvious response is, oh, I don't want to lose money. She's like, okay, cool. Makes sense. Well, what about if you only used an amount of money that you can afford to lose, which I know is really, really generic advice, and I hate those kind of generic phrases because
But they often work, mate. They often work. There's in cliches are cliches for a reason, right?
they are, but the problem with them is because we hear them so much, we don't actually think what they mean.
Yeah.
Where in reality, and like to break it down for people, like if you could only quite literally, and if you're investing in stocks like I do, you could literally only lose what you've invested, right? If you put £1,000 in, you could only lose 1,000. Well, have a think what that is, because if you're investing in the top companies in the world, like let's say, I don't know, Google, Microsoft, Apple, for example, in reality, for you to lose all your money, all of those stocks would have to disappear overnight. Now, firstly, that's quite unlikely, I would say, and equally, if it did happen, we've probably got a bit more to worry about than just our just our portfolio. But if that's like the downside, just losing money, and let's be honest, if you could afford to put that money in to Google, Apple, whatever, with a longer term view, it's probably not money that you would have otherwise spent on like a roof over your head or food on the table or like to provide for your family. So if you did lose it all, in the overall scheme of things, is it really that bad? Like, is it? If you're honest with yourself, most of the time it's not. It's just the fear of that. But what's quite interesting, I don't know if you've experienced this. I'm assuming you will have. People think that that's the risk, and they'll tell themselves that that's the risk. I don't want to lose money. What I actually believe it is what other people think of them. And that goes both ways for success or failure because people think, oh, imagine I invest and it actually goes well. And people are like, oh, like, who does he think he is? Like, look at Mr. Big Money, like, too good for us kind of thing. There's that. But equally, the other side is like, all right, well, they're going to be like, oh, I told you so. You tried that. How embarrassing. Like, you should stick to it, that kind of stuff. And I think that's really the risk for people, is what other people are going to think of them.
Yeah. Well, fear of judgment is built in us to keep alive. It's built in to keep us alive.
Mm.
It's fear of judgment that kills more dreams and stops you from taking risk than more than anyone else. What is everyone? And especially if you're a Brit, because we're such a piss-taking society. We're so horribly piss-taking, right? But when you learn that most people don't really care, and if they do care, it's actually either a good thing because they love you and they want to protect you, or B, just another piss taking Brit, and you got to suck it up and move on, right? You just have a laugh with it, but it's true, very very true.
I think,
Okay,
well, just on the back of that, I was, it's just because it's front of mind for me. I literally recorded a YouTube video about it last week. Also, they're not going to know. Like the real,
yeah,
real, you don't have to tell anyone that you're doing it. No one's got like your financials in front of them all day, every day. Not that they care anyway, but like just don't tell them. Even if it's your partner, you don't need to tell them that you're doing anything. So you can't let
well,
that be.
if you play it sensibly, right? If you go right, I've just bet our children's university fund, and yeah, it turns out Trump coin trumped me. Then you might have to open up on that. But if you're doing it sensibly, right? But you know what? Like as I'm speaking, I love living in metaphors, right? And it's almost like trading, from what I can see as an outsider looking in. Because right now I'm an outsider, right? It's almost like uh, there's a ship in the dock, right? And you can kind of go around the dock, and that's your practice account. And then you can either take an experienced captain and say, right, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, it's going to be a bit scary sometimes, but here we go. Or you can just throw yourself out into the middle of the Atlantic and go, right, try and get to America. And you don't know how to refuel, you don't know when to go in, you don't know when to go out, you don't know when to rest, you don't have the right team. And the craziness of it, of just the psychology of being away at sea by yourself, I can see how, like, just trying to figure this out alone and how lonely that could be. Whereas I'm a big believer in mentoring and coaching as a mentor and as a coach, and I spend a lot of money on my own mentoring and coaching. Like you're essentially paying for people to tell you what's not important. Right? That's essentially what mentoring is. It's like, just tell me what's not important. All right, well, you don't need to worry about what color your boat is, but you do need a boat that doesn't let water in. Oh, cool. Thanks. right? It sounds like that's kind of what you do in the trading world. Is like, right, look, just have a little play in the pond first, right? Have a little think around there. Look, you don't need the super yacht. Just buy a little rowing boat, and we don't need to go all the way over across the Atlantic. Let's try and cross the channel first and have a little go at that. Sounds like that's what you do in the trading world.
Definitely that. And I personally as well, like I invest heavily into my personal development, which has absolutely changed my life, like beyond belief. Like as an investment coach, investing in yourself is the best investment you can ever make. Obviously, I love stocks, but yourself is the best asset, right? And I see it as like buying back time because quite literally, you're just skipping all of the bad stuff that other people have gone through. Like you don't have to figure things out on your own. Whatever you're learning, whether it's investing or sport or whatever it may be, like getting a PT in the gym, like having that means you get to skip sometimes years worth of struggle and stress and all that stuff, which I think is incredibly valuable personally.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Mm.
Time and risk, right? Time, risk, and money is essentially what you're insuring against. Now, the key thing is finding the right people. I ideally always like personal recommendations. So if I, let's say, oh, Joe recommended you, obviously met you, right? But we'd only spent a handful of minutes together or a couple of hours or whatever. And I said, right, Joe, who should I get on the podcast? Who's got an interesting story that's going to add value? And he's like, speak to Ben. I went, oh yeah, cool, right? If we was to ask Neil, you and I both trust Neil. I was like, right, Neil, what do you think of this guy or this guy? And he goes, yep, no, you kind of work with that. So I find that's a good way to find mentors. Just listening to people and trying to figure out, all right, well, do I align with them on a values perspective? Yes, no. Are they my really simple factor? Are they a good bloke that's good at what they do? That's not gender dependent. You don't have to be a bloke, but generally, if good human being that's good at what they do, then yeah, they're the sort of people to work with. Okay, so I'm kind of curious, right, about this 5 minute thing.
Mm.
So when you say you're spending 5 minutes a day on you, what does that 5 minute consist of? Obviously, you pick up your phone or your laptop and then you open an app of some sort, or do you like what does that actually look like? What do you actually do?
Great point. So the big thing and the thing I spend most of my time on is like, what am I actually going to invest in? Because I'm a big believer that what you invest in is way more important than when you invest. To take it to the extremes, like if you picked a great investment, but just like on the worst day possible, as long as you can be patient, it's going to be okay. Like it's going to come back up. Like even like buying a house, if you pick like a great investment property, but the market dips, as long as you can hold that, you're going to get your money in the end. That's fine.
Yeah.
Whereas the opposite is also true. Like if you pick a terrible investment, but just on the best day possible, you're going to lose money, right?
Yeah.
It's going to crash. It's going to fail. So spending your time choosing what to invest in is the most important thing, in my opinion. So what I do and how I systemize it is I have a very set criteria from what I look for, and it's all based on what's called the fundamentals of a company. So rather than the charts or the opinions of others, it's more like the data, like how much money they're making, like what's their debt, what's their income, all that stuff. If a company meets my criteria, I will invest. If it doesn't, I won't invest. Like, it has to be black and white like that. So there's no, oh, I do like this company. I love what they sell. Irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. You're taking the emotion out. Oh, I love
Exactly.
Teslas. I love Teslas. Teslas are welcome. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. But as a business owner, I think you do similar things, right? You rather than just thinking, oh, I think this is going to be good. You've got the data in front of you, like, all right, this marketing campaign worked last time. This was the conversion rates, blah blah blah. Cool, that makes sense. Let's do that again. Whereas like, oh, it didn't work last time, but let's just give it another go. I think like, you wouldn't do that either, right? So having a really structured system there is what serves me, but also it means it's quick. Because if it's yes or no all the time, you're not spending time like, I wonder. It's just it does or it doesn't.
Yes is a great. No's are good. It's the maybes that kill you, right?
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. So that's a huge part of what I spend my time on. But then once I've done that, I've selected it, I've sort of plugged in my system, what it's going to work, when to buy, and I set the orders. It's really like day to day is more just like having a little monitor of it. I think one sort of habit I like to impose upon my students and everyone is check it once a day, just once. Okay, so pick a time that's like really convenient for you and just check your investments then, and then never not again because you don't want to get the opposite when you're like glued to your screen all day waiting for something to happen. You don't want that. But if you're just checking it once, that's cool. Equally, I say to people, check your bank account once a day. That's a really good habit to get into. If you ever feel like your personal finance is not where you want it to be, that's the quickest thing you can do to make an improvement. If you're checking that once a day, you become very aware of what it is. So it's all these little habits that actually amount to the real results rather than crazy on the first day and then getting an overnight success.
who you become in the process of that, and the skills you pick up, and the mindset you pick up, and the way in which you think and feel, versus Tesla, yeah, right. It's the person that's looking at the data. Okay,
Mm,
and then your decision criteria,
yeah.
right? Because essentially, it sounds like you've become a human algorithm, which is like, right, A equals B, buy. A equals C, don't buy. Right?
Mm.
How does your decision criteria change over time, or has it gone? No, I figured out my criteria and I'm just stuck with it.
So it's almost a mixture of both. In the criteria that I go by and I live by, that has developed over time because I've just learnt more. Things have changed in the world, i.e., 2020. I decided I need to tighten this up a little bit because the world's a little bit riskier than I thought it was. That kind of thing. The core principles are all exactly the same because when people are always looking for the new thing that's going to be, overnight great, amazing, new shiny penny, well, really, if you stick with the things that have worked for the last 10, 20, 50 years, there's a good chance they're going to work this year as well. So
Mm.
really, the long-standing fundamentals, as long as you can just follow that in most things,
Uh,
you're going to be a success.
it's true. It's like, does your company generate profit or not? No. Well, you're not going to be in business for long, right? In boxing, do you know how to throw a jab? No. Well, you're going to take a lot of punches before you land yours, right? It does come back to the world class basics, and anybody at an elite level, has got the world class basics down. So that totally makes sense. So, what do you think the future of the stock market is as we look at AI and as we start to evolve and grow into that, right? Because I see a number of different potential outcomes. One is it might be very, very positive. It might be we're able to set up these bots to do all the trading on our behalf. At the same side, right, if we've got general artificial intelligence that does what it wants, right, just like all the big scary movies, you program the intelligence to protect humankind, and then it realizes humankind is its own worst enemy, thus they destroy it. Right? So there's another fear in that sphere. Again, I'm an outsider looking in, so that's why I'm asking you as an expert, right?
Mm,
That or what happens if AI comes in, starts buying, selling, buying, selling, buying, selling, and maybe it's already doing it. I don't know, and
mm,
thus uh, it creates a series of chain reaction trades that then creates another set of chain reaction trades that then could crash the market. Again, it's not going to destroy the market because it's something that has to be catastrophically go wrong. But I'm
mm.
curious, where's your head at with all of that? Somebody that's in the field.
So I suspect it's going to create a few things. Firstly, a few negative things first, I'll say. So the negative things will be the scams are going to become way more both common but also extreme in that what people have been scammed from before has been fairly simple stuff where they've just played on your emotions, things like that. Whereas if they are now got this in their corner as well, where they can suddenly have access to all your information, all the whatever may be, um, I fear a lot of people are going to become a lot more susceptible to things like that.
Can you
So I
give me an
think,
example? So, like,
yeah. So I try and talk a lot about scams and what to look out for, things like that, because if you don't know what you don't know, which most people don't know about investing because we don't learn it, you're really a target for those people. They don't target people who are in the field. Why would they? So, for example, one thing that I know is prevalent in, particularly in the UK, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but they'll use things like, I can't think what the word would be, for want of a better phrase, like the death registry to see who's died recently. They'll then target that person's family because that person, that the family will have come into some money a few months down the line, where typically people don't know what to do when they've got a sudden injection of money. So they're looking for somewhere to put it. And what a surprise! This person's just appeared in front of you there. So that's something they're doing without AI, which is pretty manual. But imagine how much they can approach everybody in a second that's had a relative that died in the last few months, and they can reach out to all of you. It can speak as you, it can be a video, it can create. That's terrifying, I think, from that side of things. So that's kind of where I think it's bad. In the actual market itself, like actual investing, because that's against the big guys, the institutions, they're already using it. Like, if anyone thinks it's a fair field where it's just us against them, like
nah,
we're
of course not. No way. Yeah, there's no way this is Star Wars, right?
like they've already got way more than we know they've got. Like the access they got to information, all of that stuff. There's already algorithms trading for it. But I don't really see it's going to change too much in that sense. Maybe it's going to make people like us like more confident in what we're doing, but that might be a bit of a false sense of things. So
Mm.
one of my big things is I always tell people things like trading bots and things like that, please avoid them, because unless you know what you're doing, you don't know when it's going to go wrong, because they work until they don't, right? Whereas if you learn the skill yourself and you know what you're doing and why, well, you're the only person that you need to hold accountable there, right? So I'm a big fan of people keep having control of their money. Like, no one's ever going to care about your money as much as you will, right? So it's best to have the control. So that worries me a little bit as well, that people are going to be too reliant on things like AI for that. On the good side, maybe it makes it easier to, or there's more things we can invest in. Right? Things become more accessible because you don't need to know as much because AI can teach you it in an easier way. Or so I do see some benefits there too. But in the short term, I don't really think there's going to be too much of a huge shift. Long term, like you said, does it mean that it takes over and makes all decisions? Could do. Could very well
Mm.
do. I don't see it's going away anytime soon. So that would
Yeah.
be the logical end step. And in which case, I think the entire financial industry will change. Maybe we're not using money as we do currently. Maybe things like that. That's another rabbit hole to get down. But
All right, Ben's telling us to buy Bitcoin. Everyone, drop what they're doing. This is why I'm not educated enough. There needs to be a this financial disclaimer. This is not financial advice. Right? Yeah, this is not financial. Nothing on this podcast said is financial advice.
but what I think of is, I know there's people that are super into crypto and like they know what's going to come next and everything. Amazing. Like, I don't understand it in that depth at all, so I'm not going to pretend to be at all. However, you've kind of got to play the field that's in front of you, in a sense. In very real terms, yes, prepare for the future. I'm going to use boxing as an analogy because I know it's obviously big for yourself. You can be preparing mentally to fight the champion at some point in your career. Like, you want to get there originally, eventually, and do that. But there's only really a point in focusing on your next opponent, right? Training for that next opponent, the fight that's upcoming next week, or you got coming up the next few days, because that's really what you need to be tackling. So yes, prepare for the future as well, but also like, play the field that's in front of you. The stock market is doing what it's
What's next
doing.
fight? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what can you be doing right now that's actually going to make a difference to your life immediately? Because we all want a great life in 20 years, but you can actually create quite a lot of freedom in your life in the next few, actually, which
Mm.
I'm a big fan of enjoying life. So why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah. Here's a game.
Go on.
Trump has obviously just done his inauguration, right? He's just come in. So if you're playing the next fight, you're an investor in the US stock market.
Mm.
I'm an outsider looking in with zero education, right? I am the armchair bloke sat at Paddy Power on his phone app, and he's going right. I think actually, as an insider, I actually think Joseph Parker will beat Daniel Dubois. I do believe that. But right, if you I think AJ is going to get chin, right? Whatever. What do you think is going to happen to the US market? Because it looks like he's going right. Less tax, less regulation. America's back, baby. Do you think there's going to be an initial run where the markets are like, let's go, woo, and there's a lot of money to be made right now, or do you think, all right, I'll just hold your horses? You know, what
Mm.
do you see with that?
Really interesting. So what I think and how I act will be different.
Uh-huh.
So I will, no matter what I'm about to say, I will stick to my principles. In that, unless something meets my criteria and follows what I want to do, I will not do it, because I've learned so many times that I just lose too much if I detour. However, what would I assume happens? People need to remember that the thing that actually moves the stocks chart, like the price, is not how well the company's doing, how well the economy's doing. It's not. It's just people.
Emotion.
Yeah, it's emotion, exactly. If more people want to buy, the price goes up. If more people sell, the
Mhm.
price goes down. But that's it. So if you look at a chart, it's not a company's performance. It's just human psychology. That's kind of how I look at it. Now, what do I think that means then for Trump? I think overall it's perceived to be a really good thing for economy. You know, particularly I use the US stock market a lot, so it would be perceived that it's good. So I would assume more things will be rising than falling in the short term. Now, I don't know. He's quite a, and this is not a political thing, he's quite a extreme person in that he won't do something by halves, right? So what the actual knock-on effect will be, I don't think we've actually seen that before. So it would just be anyone's guess. Like, no one's been as sort of extreme as he is in what he does. So I'll be interested to see it. In the short term, yes, I expect to be quite positive. In the long term, do I think the market will probably self-regulate? Probably. Like, it's gone up for the last 40 of the last 50 years. You're probably not going to make that much better or worse in the long run, you know?
Hmm. I'm just going to put it into ChatGPT. What happened to the US stock market in the 12? Past data doesn't do this, right? But after Trump's first presidency, right? Because it's just interesting because this is where I've always danced around trading because I'm fascinated by it because it's all just psychology. It's just human management. It's emotion management. How can you keep your head in the game, right? Versus everybody's saying sell, 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 sell. Everyone's scared. And you're like, well, it's a good company, right? They're not losing money. It's a good company, you
Yeah,
know. Uh,
it's true.
so yeah.
And, I mean, you said about Warren Buffett earlier. Warren Buffett is not sitting there checking the trades every day. Like, he's not staring at charts.
He's
Looking
just
about,
reading, he's just reading a report, like companies like statements, and he's going right. Where is the company actually? Right, as I
he's,
understand it.
yeah, looking at the data, making a decision and sticking with it. Like, that's if the most successful investor in the world is doing that, it's probably a good indication of a good way to approach it. I think.
Yeah. Well, I run the question on ChatGPT and it said the S&P 500 rose 24% January to January 17 to 18. Dow Jones raised 25%. So forget your principles, dive in, right? But that's the dance, fear and greed, and you can see. But whereas you've run the course so many times, and you've gone out to sea, and you've gone. I don't care. They're mermaids. They're just mermaids. Don't go and dance with the don't sing with the mermaids. They dance with the mermaids. Yeah, but look how attractive. Like the S&P 500 did this last time. Don't dance with the mermaids. We have principles here, right? I can see how it can be a fun world, but also a roller coaster if not managed properly.
100%. And like you quite rightly have alluded to a few times, it's just the mindset of it. Like it truly is. If you can just detach yourself and be like, look, whatever I think doesn't really matter in the overall scheme of things. It's going to serve you much better long term.
That's something that Guy Kawasaki said that really stuck with me. He said, "The profit's made when you buy,
Yeah,
and the other part of profit that's made is just waiting. It's made
mm,
when you buy and when you wait. That's it."
100%. Exactly that. So yeah, I agree with that. Which is again, like, what you invest in is way more important than when you invest. It's so
Cool.
true.
Ben, mate, I've deeply enjoyed this. It's been really loads of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you? And if somebody's listening to this and you're a business owner or you're a coach and you're like, actually, I've been thinking about trading for a while. And I don't know where to start, and I like the sound of this Ben bloke. Where can we send him?
So great place is probably my Instagram because you can sort of see what I'm about, which I quite like. There's a lot of people out there, so probably find someone that suits you is my best advice, right?
Yeah.
So if you couldn't imagine spending or having a beer with me, having a drink with me, like you said, I'm probably not a good person to learn from. But equally, if I am, obviously come check out my stuff. So Instagram is at Ben Knight Investments,
Uh-huh.
and my business is the Trade Tribe. So thetradetribe.com, you can find all the information.
And if someone wants to spend some time with you learning about this stuff, but they're not quite ready to invest, is there any webinars or courses or anything that you can send them to?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I do a lot of like free online webinars because I think you need to see something before you know if it's for you or not. You need to test it, if you will. So I put these free webinars on. People can come along, see all the things that I use, see how I do it, and quite quickly they'll be like, "Oh, I can imagine myself doing it," or "That's not for me." But either way, I think that's a good way to do it. So yeah, if you go on the tradetribe.com, you'll see where our next ones are.
Spot on. Ben, mate, I really appreciate you. Thanks so much for coming on. I think we enjoyed the conversation. We had loads of fun. Guys, if you like this episode, please share it to your story. If you want to check out Ben's stuff, just look in the description of the podcast and you'll be able to see links over to his Instagram and all his stuff will be on there. But Ben, mate, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, man.